Hey guys, check it out. It's the brand new Raspberry Pi Zero. Do a quick unboxing here for you. Now, you may have noticed that my review is coming out weeks after everybody else's. In fact, if you look on the outside of this bag here, you'll see this is from 2015-11-24, and this isn't going to launch until the end of January. And there's a reason. I didn't get an advanced version of this. You may not know this, but I'm not in any way affiliated with Raspberry Pi. And I have a feeling that they didn't really want to send it to me because they thought I was going to bag it. And I probably would have. You see, the Raspberry Pi Zero doesn't have any of the stuff that I keep asking for. I've got the Raspberry Pi 2 here and the Raspberry Pi Model A+. But what I keep asking for is to add Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and faster Ethernet, and this doesn't have any of that. And so I started thinking this was the worst idea ever. Sure, it's cheap, but it fails in so many ways. In fact, you can't use your normal HDMI on it. You can't use a normal USB on it. And I was like, what the hell is this? And then I thought, well, I do actually have one of these HDMI mini cables. In fact, I got it because I'm using a video camera right here that came with one, which it's kind of weird, but I actually have one of those. And then I thought, well, I don't have any of these USB things, but I do have a number of USB micro cables just lying around, and maybe I could rig a system that could do it. And it doesn't have any GPIOs, but maybe I could find a way that I could hook up some other things to those GPIO connectors. And I thought, hang on, wait a sec. This isn't the worst Pi ever. This is the best Pi ever. By a long shot. So let's get in and start talking about the details of what this Pi is, what it's going to enable me to do, the sorts of fun projects I've already got in mind for it, and just why this is such an exciting new product. Okay, let's start with a walk around and just explain exactly what we're up to here. Let's just do a quick walk around. I've got some non-magnetic tweezers here so I can point to stuff while it's that zoomed in. This is your power, which is the same as it's always been, the 5-volt micro USB power. This is the USB OTG, which is a little bit different, and we're going to have to talk quite a bit about this thing. Next over here, we have the HDMI Micro, or HDMI Mini rather. The HDMI Mini, as you know from the opening segment, I have one of these cables, but if you don't, you can get an attachment, or of course, you can run this thing headless. This over here is the SD, Micro SD, and in the middle we have the Broadcom 1 gigahertz CPU. This Broadcom CPU is the same as you'll find in the Raspberry Pi version A+, in the older B+. It's the same one. They've overclocked it a little because there's so little happening on this board. They've overclocked it to run at 1 gigahertz, but it's actually the same chip as they were using before. This has 512 megs of RAM. Of course, it's got the 4 mounting holes on the front here, which makes it easier to mount. So you're looking at pretty much the standard Raspberry Pi sort of stuff. And on the back here, you can see we've got no chips at all, actually, but what we've got is some of these cool landing pads. So it makes it easier to solder. And of course, along the back there, you have the GPIOs. Should have shown that on the front side, actually. Those GPIOs are empty slots, which means that you can solder wires straight in. In fact, I'll show you a bunch of different solutions for the back there. And in some upcoming videos, I'll actually solder some stuff in and make it easier to use. Just as a quick size comparison, this is the Raspberry Pi version A+. Actually, that's the way it should go. It's the A+, and this is the Raspberry Pi version 2. So let's just do a quick comparison and the reasons that you would buy these different versions. Well, first of all, we have the Raspberry Pi version 2. The Raspberry Pi version 2 comes complete with everything you need to get started straight out of the box, including the network card, which makes it easy to attach to the internet. It makes it easy to start running it over, say, SSH, which, as you've seen in my other videos, I use often. It's got full-size USBs, which means it's quick to plug and play. It's already got the GPIOs soldered in. It's got the display ribbon, the camera ribbon, power, of course, full-sized HDMI, and a headphone TV jack. This also has the upgraded CPU and the larger amount of RAM. So this is really the best for starting out. If you're thinking about getting involved in the Raspberry Pi community, you should really, for the sake of ease and convenience, start out with this one. Now, as you move over to the A+, the A+ still includes the 2 ribbons. So anything you want to do with a camera or with the display, it's easy enough to do this. This also has the 3.5 millimeter jack out and the USB connector, which I often plug in the Wi-Fi dongle to. Of course, the pre-soldered GPIOs make this an easy transition board. So if I'm going to start a project, which I typically do, I'll start it here, format the card, get it all set up, configure my Wi-Fi dongle, then I'll remove the card from here, head on over to my version A+, move the Wi-Fi dongle over and plug it in, and we're away. Now I've got a much smaller, easier to use Raspberry Pi. But the Pi Zero doesn't quite work as easily as that, because with the Pi Zero, once I've put this in, I'm sorry, just twisting it around. Once I've put this in, I'm kind of only at the start of my project, because I'm going to need to do some other stuff. All right, what sort of other stuff am I going to need to do? Well, from here you have a couple of choices. Let's talk about those choices and what makes this board so revolutionary. So for $5, not including the SD or the power, this basically competes with the Arduino. If you wanted to do any Arduino-based stuff, you'll need to install some rails. But the rails, the GPIO rails, are actually really cheap, and it really opens up the choices to the sorts of projects that you want to choose. Now again, I wouldn't start with this, but if I already have a project in mind, I could choose the typical GPIO rails. You see these rails here? These rails are exactly what you'd find on your other Raspberry Pis. So all I do is just break this at the right point, slot it in here. I'm not going to do it just now. This will be in an upcoming video. Slot these in and then solder them in. I've got a soldering iron right here. I could do it just now. These types of GPIOs are great, especially when you're doing, like I say, Arduino-based projects. Arduino-compatible projects typically use a female-to-female cable connector, like this one. Yeah, you see that? These wires, a lot of my projects use these. And then, say, if you wanted to use a relay, you simply, can you see that? Those pins are the same as these pins, just soldered in place, yeah? So what you do with the female-to-female connectors, oh, sorry for dropping that, is you just plug them in like this, and then you'd plug this end into those, which is super easy and convenient. But let's say you had a different type of project in mind, and you were thinking that you might use a breadboard instead. So this is just a simple breadboard, and typically because these breadboards are female themselves, they would accept this type of pin. What you'd do is use a male connector. See these cables? They're male to male. But there's another type of GPIO rail that you could get that looks like this. These GPIO rails are very easy for connecting the male ends. So you see, now I have two different choices of the style of GPIO that I want to use, depending on the project that I want to do. Of course, neither decision is particularly detrimental, because you have these male to female type connectors. So basically your GPIO selection, while entirely up to you, it doesn't really matter. It's just for convenience sake. Oh, well, that's kind of cool, right? I mean, you can choose whatever you want. Okay, that's the GPIOs, so that you can make this into something that's straight up functional. Let's move these out the way. But from this point, you'll notice there isn't really that much you can do. I mean, I have the USB micro connector here. That means that it connects to a TV on this end, just letting it focus a little bit, TV on this end, and the smaller end will connect right here to the Raspberry Pi Zero. Just going to get that lined up so you can see how that works. See, that end fits in there, and this end is the typical HDMI. But if I plugged it in at this point, it couldn't do anything. You see, there's no inputs. There's nothing at all that this could do. The other connector that would be lined up here is just your power. So I can't plug in any GPIOs. I can't plug in anything to my USB OTG unless I've committed to something. So like I say, you pretty much at this point need to add the GPIOs or need to sort out a USB OTG cable. Now, it just so happens that you can start to sacrifice some of your other cables. Now, what I found was that I have a USB hub, and this USB hub takes a mini in. So I can go from micro to mini, and I don't even need to go to a female connector at all. I could just do 2 males on that. So that means I can plug in my USB connector, and once I've done that, then I can plug in my keyboard and mouse and all the other things that I need to plug in to have a fully functioning computer. But instead of starting to cut stuff up, what I did instead was I went to oneupkeyboards.com and I got one of these USB packs. And you can get a USB OTG pack full with instructions on how to assemble this and make your own whatever length you want OTG cable, which is super useful. So now with the USB OTG opening up the possibilities of connection to input and the GPIOs being soldered, suddenly this little guy suddenly looks like a very good idea. It's a very small, fully customizable version of the Raspberry Pi. And what's even better, I've seen community members out there start to take apart these little Wi-Fi dongles. Now, I haven't done it yet, but the plan is I can tear this apart and I can actually solder it directly to the USB stuff underneath. Again, this Raspberry Pi isn't a very simple solution. I certainly wouldn't recommend this to the beginner. I certainly wouldn't have this as my only Raspberry Pi. But suddenly, in terms of projects, this one becomes the most compelling one out there. Let's think for a second about some of my other projects, like my garage door opener. Well, the garage door opener just needs a Wi-Fi dongle and the GPIOs. I don't know why it would need anything else, so why not use this one? What about my alarm clock project? Well, that needs audio, and I could get the audio from various different sources. I've seen people use projects where they use the GPIO as a radio antenna, so I could actually set it up in a different way to use the radio. What about my relay projects or any of my motion sensing projects? Well, as I showed you, the relay just connects through the GPIO, so once I have the GPIOs set up, that's plug and play. So again, this Raspberry Pi suddenly looks like a great project solution. It uses less power, it's much smaller and easier to fit in places, and look how low that profile is. So I've gone full circle on this thing. When I started out, I thought it was going to be the worst, and by the end of it, I've realized that this is going to be so much more fun than my other Raspberry Pis. Sure, I still want the Raspberry Pi to come with a gigabit Ethernet. I still want that to be replaced with a gigabit Ethernet, and I still want it to come with Wi-Fi out of the box. But there's something just so compelling about these $5 versions. And I know that at the start, they're very difficult to find and really tough to get your hands on, but that won't last long. They're going to keep churning these things out, and for $5, you're going to get a hell of a computer. Cool. Well, thanks for watching today, guys. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. All of the stuff that you saw in the video today will have links on Amazon, so you can pick up any of the bits and pieces that you're really looking for. Anything you're trying to get your hands on should be available. Well, except maybe this. Don't forget to check out my other Raspberry Pi videos, my other non-Raspberry Pi videos. There's lots of cool stuff that I've been up to for the last little while. Of course, if you found this video particularly useful, buy me a cup of coffee in the About section. Don't forget to check out my other Raspberry Pi Zero videos, where I'll be doing projects like adding the GPIOs, figuring out some other things, how to use this OTG, and of course, building my own cable with the kit from OneUp Keyboards. Thanks again for watching. Don't forget to ask any questions you can in the comment section below. And if you already have one of these things, help out some other people. See if you can answer some of their questions in the comment section below. Thanks again for watching.